Welcome to Side Project. I am your host, Joe Tannenbaum, and with me today we have a man of the internet, Aaron Francis, co-founder of Try Hard Studios. How you doing today, Aaron?
Good. I am honored to be your guest on Side Projects today.
I don't know if honor is the right word, but I'll take it. I will accept that.
Hey, I get to decide. I
Okay.
am honored, so that
That
is the right word.
That is fair. You have another podcast which is excellent called Mostly Technical. And that podcast, although I am an Ian Stansman, I'm a huge stan, you get
Tell
a little
him
bit
that.
of shame. There's a little side project shame on that. And we don't have any of that here.
That's good.
You can work on whatever you want without guilt, without
that.
shame. Doesn't matter if anything comes out of it. Doesn't matter if there's a publish button hit, whatever you want.
Thank you.
And you seem to have a lot of those going on lately. And so I'm curious which one of the 1,000 you'd like to talk about today.
Well, I just first want to acknowledge that I'm glad that we acknowledged that Ian is a no man. He's always bringing me down. He's like, don't do
Always.
that, Aaron. I'm like, what in the world? I got to do stuff.
Joyless.
So
that
yeah,
man.
I appreciate having a yes man on the show today. I kind of want to talk about Solo. So we got a lot of projects going on, one of which is probably near and dear to your heart, and that's this new library Laravel package called Solo. So let's talk about that one.
Let's talk about it. So this, correct me if I'm wrong, this came from that new Composer Run Dev. Is that what it was? Composer Run Dev?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you said, that's cute. Let's go 100 times further with that. So tell me the process. Tell me how this came to be.
So I was creating a new Laravel project for this game show that I was on, Jason Lingstorf's channel. Super fun.
I love
And
that.
so this was
He
the
does a
first-
great job with that.
It was awesome. This was the first new Laravel project that I had created since the introduction of Composer Run Dev, which Taylor introduced a few weeks ago. That is basically a PHP entry point around NPX concurrently. So NPX concurrently, they set it up to run, npm run dev, PHP artisan serve, PHP queue work, and maybe pale or tail the logs or something. And so I ran that, and I was like, oh, this is kind of nice. First time experiencing like the combined command to run the whole thing, kind of nice. However, as I was like developing the application, I needed to add reverb, and I was like, so now I got to go muck around with, NPX concurrently and the escape, like all the escaping and adding of the new colors. And I was like, oh, that kind of sucks. And then you switch over to the place where it's running, and the logs are interspersed with HTTP responses or interspersed with reverb errors. And I'm like, this is not great. We could do so much better. This is not great. And so I came home after that and on a lark watched your CLI Experiments Laracasts course, which is very good. I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
And so I'm laying in bed. It's like 10:30. And I got the phone sideways and I'm just watching you just type stuff. I'm like, man, this is really good. I could do this. And so the next day I came in and was like, I'm gonna make a better version of this Composer Run Dev, and I'm going to do it as like a CLI tool, as a TUI. And as things do, it just kind of spiraled from there. It just kind of, was like, oh, this will be simple. And now, we're several weeks later and open issues and dozens to a few hundred commits, and it's not finished yet. So hoisted by my own petard once again. But it's kind of awesome.
It's kind of incredible. You took it so far. You took it further than I think you mentioned sort of in the beginning, like, oh, I'm thinking of doing this, and here's like a prototype. And I was like, that's amazing. That's great. And then you like started sprinting down the road. So you have accidentally recreated tmux via PHP, which I'm not like super familiar with tmux, but I know enough about it to know that's basically what you did.
Know that you shouldn't do that. Yeah, same.
And I also want to like emphasize that your learning curve is like enormous. You went from, I have virtually zero knowledge of this space, I don't know how to put together like a comprehensive TUI/CLI app, and then you went, I am building a full screen interactive multi-process TUI. outside of the course, I mean, you're doing way more than what's in the course. Where were your stumbling blocks? Like where did you go? I don't know what this is, and I wish I knew more about this. Or because a lot of it I find in this space is not even knowing the term to search for yet. You've got to figure out what you're looking for before you even get there. So like, can you? Do you have any of those identified? Like what the stumbling blocks were in the beginning process?
Where were the stumbling blocks? Everywhere. All over the place. Everything was a stumbling block.
It's all stumbling blocks.
It's all stumbling blocks all the way down. So I think of myself as a very like working class developer. And so when people talk about TMUX, I'm like, sorry, friendo. I don't know what that means. Sounds awesome for you. That sounds great. But I don't know what that is. They're like, oh, I gotta, set up my tree sitter and my LSP in NeoVim. And I'm like, is that PHP Storm? Because that's what I use. And PHP Storm rules.
Yeah.
And so once you start mucking around with accidentally inventing TMUX, there's a whole layer down there that I'm just not terribly familiar with. I mean, so we can talk about a terminal and a shell. What are those things? I still don't know. How are they different? I have no idea. And so it's like, how am I supposed to even do any of this when I can't describe to you even now the difference between a terminal and a shell? Beats me. And so then I know
it every 2 weeks when I have to relook it up. That's when I know it.
No clue.
And then the information just disappears from my head. I know shockingly little about what I'm actually doing. I'm really just doing what you're doing, stumbling along.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I am like a plumber that doesn't know theory and only knows practice. It's like, well, water flows downhill. Make sure it doesn't leak. I'm like, hey, well, that's pretty good. I'm a plumber now. And so you start mucking around with like dealing with the output of other processes, and you're in the wild, wild west because it's like they could do anything, and you don't really have control over it, but you got to be prepared for it. And so then you enter into the whole world of ANSI codes and stuff. Fortunately, I have found, ANSI codes have been around for 100 years, and therefore ChatGPT is very well versed in like what ANSI codes are, what they do, like how to work with them. And so I spent a lot of time being like, hey, this is happening. I don't know what this means. Can you help me? Like, why did my whole screen just turn blue? Can you help me? Because I can't figure that out.
Right.
It's like, oh, you have a ANSI code that never got reset. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me more about ANSI codes. What does that mean? And so, it kind of, the guy that created SQLite has said in later years that if he had known you weren't supposed to write a database from scratch, he wouldn't have done it. But he didn't know that. And that's that's how I feel. Like if I had known that this was stupid, I wouldn't have done it. But because I didn't, I did it. And it's awesome.
You're describing my career. Basically.
Yes, exactly. And it's great. It works. I ended up, in the fullness of time, I've ended up creating basically like a terminal emulator, a screen emulator, basically. Because one of the problems is like, I'm gathering all of this output from these underlying processes, and then they're full of ANSI codes. But some of the ANSI codes, I'm looking at you, Jess Archer, some of the Laravel prompts, for example, it's like, hey, what if we, as you're typing, we move up 5 lines and clear down and then redraw from the 5 lines that we moved up? And I'm like, guys, I wasn't prepared for that. I started with the idea that you would be tailing a log, and I could just be like, haha, I got the output there, I'm going to write it over there. And then Jess comes along, and she's like, no, Laravel prompts are awesome, and we do partial screen clearing, and you got to be ready for that. And so that is the point when I moved into, all right, I have to take all of this output from these underlying processes, I have to take it all, I have to run it through an emulator to figure out what the final representable state should be, and then give that to Solo to represent. And so I'm like doing all of this stuff
that's an
in memory.
enormous task. That's like
Dude.
like parsing level 1000, because like when you look at ANSI codes, it's not like HTML. Like HTML, you can kind of suss out. You can say like I see tags here, whatever. ANSI amidst content is a jumbled, non-human parsable mess. You've got to like really go through it. And the thing you just talked about, that mental leap of saying like I just printed this sequence to the terminal, and it actually is not about formatting. it's going to move the cursor around and
It's
erase
gonna move
things.
the cursor.
And that's not, to me, that was not intuitive in the beginning. I was
No.
like, I'm just printing something to the screen and it's like, it's controlling the
Yes.
terminal. And so that is a mental hurdle that you have to sort of like get over and figure out and like grok in order to move forward, right? That's a huge
Yes.
one because
In my-
if it was just formatting, you're like, okay, I just need to like sort of parse out the formatting, but
Exactly.
there's actions here, you know?
In my adorable naivety, I thought ANSI codes are for colors, and like it makes everything pretty. And then you realize it's like, no, this manipulates the cursor and it clears the screen and it sets settings and retrieves settings, and you're like, well, that means like if I am in control of a process and I'm just randomly or rather faithfully printing out the code or the output from the underlying process, it's going to muck about with my process. Like it's going to muck about with what I'm trying to show on the screen. So I'm drawing this, beautiful chrome around this little pane of like output, but this output in this little pane is now reaching outside and clearing the screen. And it's like, God freaking dang it. So now I run it all through a buffer, but then you get into the situation where it's like, all right, well, how do you keep track of content and ANSI kind of separately but kind of together, because you need to do word wrapping and you need to keep track of like what colors this line should be up to this character, but then turn it off. And then the insidious part is, let's say you've got a string of red text, right? And your cursor's at the end, and somebody decides, all right, let's turn the text back to black for the next few characters, right? String of red text, turn off red, go back to black, let's start typing again. Here's something fun. Let's move the cursor all the way back to the middle of the red text and keep typing. What color should it be? Well, whatever it was at the end. It doesn't become red. The cursor carries these ANSI codes back in time, and it's like, I'm going to start writing, but you need to respect my ANSI codes. But also, once I'm done writing and I move the cursor away, the very next character has to retain the fact that it was red before you came in here and overwrote it. And so now it's like, you can't just say, all right, red goes from position 0 to position 20. You have to say red is position 0 through 20. Every single character is red, such that if you bring the cursor and start overwriting it, doesn't matter, because positions 17, 18, 19, and 20 are still red, even though you overwrote in the middle with black. It's like, oh shoot, so now I have to keep track of every ANSI code for every single character? And
Anybody
unless I'm
listening
an
to this
idiot,
would go,
the answer is
why
yes.
would you do this?
I
Why
don't know,
would you
man.
put yourself through this? Because
don't know.
that's like a recipe for insanity.
It is
wild. And actually,
is.
I'm not even sure I knew that before you told me about that a couple weeks ago. And it does make sense, because all you're doing is just continually printing things, and there is a sequence to it. It's just that visually it's doing something else. But so it does sort of make sense. There is logic there, but it's not, to our human brains, it's just a scramble. Like that's insane.
It's insane. Yeah, and so I was like, when I realized that, it was truly a Laravel prompts thing, because it was the one moving the cursor around in a way that I hadn't experienced before. And that's when I started to think like, crap, I have to keep track of a buffer of characters and a buffer of like display decoration. And I felt like I reached a new, or a level of like oneness with the machine. And I felt like, what's his name? Jeff Daniels. Is that his name? Jeff Daniels, when he goes into Tron and he's like inside the computer and you can see how it's working. I don't know if that's his name. Somebody's going to make fun of me for that. But I felt like I was inside the computer. This is so bizarre. I was in Boise and, hanging out with Steve and Kelsey all day. And then at night I'm in the hotel and it's like quiet and there are no children there. And I'm like, what if I just like worked on something? And so I'm laying in bed, I've got music playing, and my eyes are closed as I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to move a cursor and take information with it and like insert it without having to overwrite? It was just the weirdest thing. It was a delight. It was so fun. But it was one of those things where like you close your eyes for 30 minutes and then you open it and write it down and see if it works. And I just haven't done that in forever.
And it felt great, right? Isn't that so
awesome.
satisfying? It just like
So
poured
satisfying.
out of you, and you're like, even if it's not 100%, we probably just got 85% there.
Yes.
And now I just need to tweak it a little bit, right? It just sort of like flowed. I love that.
So this is fun.
This is one of those projects where it's like virtually 100% learning, probably 110% learning. There's no like,
dude, totally.
there's no just like, oh, I'm in a familiar space and I just know like the thing I want to do. You're doing both things at the same time. You have an objective, but you have to learn everything to get there. But that being said, you did this all within, I want to say 3 weeks. Is that the correct timeline? Some less.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
I mean, that's wild.
Not bad. Yeah,
that's not bad at all. And are you using this now on like a regular basis? Or are you using your own package?
Yeah.
And you're happy with it, or you're finding more things with it that you want to tweak, or how's that looking?
Yes, both.
Both?
Yes, and his name is Jeff Bridges. I looked it up, so I had Jeff right.
Oh,
so,
yeah, I was like, Jeff Daniels? I don't know about that.
No,
yeah.
Jeff Daniels is Dumb and Dumber, so,
Correct.
6 to 1, half a dozen to the other. So I am using this package. Some of the things that I knew were going to be issues have become issues. I guess, congrats to me. I knew there were going to be problems, and I was right. The biggest one that we found early on was stubborn processes, or processes that the sub-processes spawned, like many layers deep. And so then when you quit Solo, it left a few of these lingering processes
Some zombie
around,
processes
which is
there,
not great. Like, the whole point is like, start a bunch of processes, and when you stop, it stops a bunch. Well, you've only delivered half of the promise if you don't stop them all. So it was stuff like, npm run dev actually spawns Vite, and PHP artisan serve actually spawns a few other, underlying processes, depending on the platform you're on, which has been another big problem. And so being able to consistently kill all of the underlying processes was the first kind of like major hurdle that took us from like 0.1 to 0.2 after I fixed it. And the solution there was to do a little bit, and this is again above my pay grade / below the layer of the stack that I normally work on. I had to do a little bit of command line foo to figure out, all right, based on my PID of Solo, give me all the PIDs that I spawned and all the PIDs that they spawned, just forever and ever and ever. And so the solution there was continue to try to kill them gracefully from PHP, just like say, the Symfony process, just tell the underlying Symfony process to stop. Give it a few seconds, and then just basically bail out, kill yourself. Yeah. So then after the main Solo process stops, there is now basically a monitoring process. So when you start Solo, it starts the TUI process, but it also itself spawns an underlying process that is the monitoring process. And so it's running these two processes the whole time. One is rendering the TUI and doing all the work and everything, and the other is just kind of hanging out and watching. And the one that's hanging out and watching, every second or something like that, it says, all right, what are all the processes that have been spawned? Let me just hang on to those. Then when Solo, the main process, dies, that monitor process kicks into gear and says, all right, the main TUI, the thing that you've been looking at, is dead. Let's go see if anybody else is still alive and kill them all. And then after it does that, it then exits. And so that's just been totally foolproof. And so that's been incredibly helpful to have, because there are some weird Pale Nuno's tailing package doesn't respond to SIGTerm or something like that, and so it's it just doesn't die. And so this monitoring process, once Solo is dead, it assumes that anyone that's left over is pretty stubborn, and it just brute forces them. And so that's now foolproof, which is quite nice.
That's a tricky one. That's a tricky one to solve, but that's a clever, unshockingly a clever solution. I was doing, what was it for? My US talk. I was doing the FFmpeg stuff. Yeah. And I was spawning all of these child FFmpeg processes, and I wasn't consistently cleaning them up. And I would constantly PSOX, pipe grep, what am I looking for? And it was just so many on the screen. So I had to figure out how to effectively clean that up. But that was a much more contained situation. Are you allowing people to add their own processes into the mix? I know that was an idea at some point. And they can just say this command is running, pipe it into a new tab, and it just works.
Exactly.
Dude, you're a wizard. That's incredible.
Yep, exactly.
That's amazing.
So I ship with, it ships with this app or Solo service provider. And in the Solo service provider, it's got npm run dev, tail f storage logs, and then maybe one more that's commented out. PHP artisan serve, I think, is commented out. But I also, so those are all the ones, because I use herd, I don't need PHP artisan serve, but a lot of people do, so I just left it in there, commented out. Those are set up as like auto starting commands. So if you run solo and you've uncommented that one, it's going to start 3 commands in 3 different tabs running those processes. There's also the notion of lazy commands, which would be like PHP artisan queue work and PHP artisan reverb start. So you can add those as lazy commands, but they don't auto start. So this is a nice situation if you're like, I'm just working on the front end, I'm going to run solo, I don't need a queue worker, I don't need reverb, I don't need, whatever else, but they're there such that if, you're working on the back end, you can just hit the right arrow, go over to reverb and hit S, and reverb will start. But it doesn't auto start because that could be annoying, and you might need it, 1/10 of the time or something. And so we have those 2 affordances. Lazy commands don't auto start, but they show up on your provider or like on your screen. And then regular commands just show up and start themselves. And it's just an array. Like you could just say, Joe's command as the key, and then literally any command that you want to run as the value, and then that will be running in solo with the output piping in and showing you, and you can tab over to it and pause it and that sort of stuff.
The notion of just saying run any command and I'll figure out how to properly output it feels stressful in my entire body, and I'm so impressed that you are doing it. That's amazing.
It's stressful. It's very stressful.
You're like, I haven't slept in weeks.
Truly.
What is on the docket? Are you pushing this further? Are you saying this is kind of done? Where are you at with it?
So the final thing that I have, I think there are 2 final things that both kind of got munged into one PR because I was like manic. So the final things, the first would be custom hotkeys. So right now,
I was going to ask you.
Right now, you can do hotkeys to like scroll the logs up if you missed something, switch tabs, stop a process, restart a process, that sort of stuff. And somebody was like, I want to use Vim hotkeys. I was like, that's awesome. What are you talking about? What is Vim hotkeys? I don't know what Vim hotkeys is.
If you put out a TUI, it's T-minus -5 seconds before somebody says Vim hotkeys ?
Vim hotkeys. I'm like, sounds cool. What does that mean? So instead of doing the easy thing, which is like, we can just, instead of arrow up, you can also add J or K or whatever it is. Yeah, we'll just make that an alias. No. Of course not. We have to have an entire way of setting up your own custom hotkeys. And so we're close. I've got that fully working on a PR that allows you to basically register like a key provider. So you can have default keys, or you can have Vim hotkeys, or you could extend either one of those or some combination of those and have like Joe's favorite hotkeys or something. And a lot of what I'm trying to do in this is set it up such that teams can customize it for themselves without stomping over each other's setups. And so like you may want Vim, I certainly don't. How do we give that affordance in the package such that 2 developers working on the same repo can have differences like that? And so it ends up being a lot of like, let's register a thing, let's register a class, whether that's a theme, dark and light modes, both supported, a theme or a hotkey provider or something, and let's register it under a key, and then use your .env to pick which key you want. And so maybe everyone on the team has registered in their service provider Joe's awesome hotkeys, but nobody else uses it because their .env is set to default mode or Vim keys or whatever. And so that's the way that I've kind of figured out to like, let's have 15 different options, and each person gets to choose their own individually. So in that PR, we've got custom global hotkeys, but also command specific hotkeys, which is very interesting because let's say you're on like, so the logs command that I wrote, it like tails the Laravel log file, but in the process of like mucking about with the output that it received from tail storage logs, it collapses vendor frames. So you don't get, 18 vendor frames going through the service container and you're like, God freaking dang it, I can't see what I'm working with here. And so it's like an enhanced log command. Now, you can imagine that sometimes you might want to see the vendor frames depending on the error that you're debugging, but you're kind of hosed unless this command has its own hotkey. So when you like arrow over to logs, you see a new row of hotkeys, and one of them is V, and that says vendor frames.
Yes.
And you can like and it shows the vendor frames. You're like, I got it. It is in the container. Hit V again, and the vendor frames go away. So now commands themselves can register hotkeys, because you can also imagine on the logs, you might want to hit T to truncate, be like, I'm done. I don't need to see all this crap. It's fine.
Yeah.
Just truncate it. Let me start over. And so now commands can register hotkeys. So we have global and local hotkeys in that PR, and then there's one other thing, but I'll pause there.
So let's say I have my own command I'm running, I can register hotkeys that do custom behavior on that screen. How am I tapping into the command? Am I just running other commands? Are you providing an interface to interact with that command? Like how is that happening in a generic way? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so in a generic way, let's say the enhanced log command, which is my wrapper around tail, that is a subclass of the command class that Solo ships with. And in the command class, I've left a few basically like no-op methods where it's like, hey, I've got all of like everything that has been output, I have all of it right here. I'm going to pass it through this method called modify output, and then I will put it out to the screen. Modify output doesn't do anything. It just returns what you gave it. Except in the enhanced log command, modify output walks the lines looking for vendor frames, modifies it, and then gives it back. And so there are a few affordances like that like the super or the parent just left blank for the sake of the children. But you can also imagine, like, let's say the truncate hotkey, which I haven't written yet, but you have access in the subclass, you have access to the command as it was written. So you can see like, what is the log file that they're working with? When I hit T, I can just do whatever I want inside of PHP and just say like file put contents nothing and put it into that file. That's totally fine. There is also a way, because Symfony gives you things I don't know, TTY and PTY. Don't know what those things are, but I do know that PTY is like pretend, or I think it's actually pseudo. Yeah, I like pretend a little better, but it's like it's a pretend TTY or a pseudo TTY, and this is the method by which you can give input to the underlying process from like the PHP/Symfony layer, right? And so interactive commands are coming, but you don't actually have to go interactive. You could have a hotkey that says send this string, and the string could be like type AARON enter. Send that string to the underlying process. And so you can imagine that if you have a certain command that pauses for yes or pauses for are you sure or something, and you don't want to go full interactive mode because you're like, I don't actually need it, you can just add hotkeys of Y and N. And then in your PHP class, you can say when the person hits Y, just send through the input the character Y, or send through the input the character N, and then just like we'll just keep going. And so those are kind of the three methods by which I think somebody would hook into local hotkeys. That would be like modifying something, some affordance that the parent class has given you, run some just arbitrary command like file put contents or arbitrary PHP, or send input into the underlying running process through Symfony's PTY thing.
Here's what I like about all this, and I think it's maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, indicative of your personality. You were like, I'm not in control of this, so I'm taking control of all of this. Like, nothing gets through the gates without my stamp of approval, like without running through my code base, which I love. And I've never really thought about approaching it that way, but it affords basically like unlimited flexibility. You've done a very, very smart thing here. That's very cool.
Yeah, and I'm always thinking about like, because I am like a working man developer, I spend a ton of time just like looking around in source code and being like, where can I get my grubby little paws on this process? How can I like, Laravel does that. I want to do something different. Like, what is some weird way that I can like hook into what's about to happen to affect my will? And so when I'm writing a library, I'm also thinking that. I'm like, how do people want to hook into this? Well,
what are the hook
how
points?
Would I want to hook into it?
Yep.
100 different ways. And so let me count them. And so that's kind of like where all of that comes from.
I was source saving a little bit because I was trying to figure out a better way to re-render on terminal resize that was a little more effective. And I found that I think prompts itself is hooking into the Symfony class, but it's accessing a protected method through reflection and firing. I was like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Good.
Yep.
And by any means necessary, get in there, you know? It was great.
I've got the solution for that, by the way. I can show you after the code that does that.
I have one too. I'm curious what you came up with, but
it's gnarly.
It's gnarly. Mine's pretty clean. Mine's pretty chill. So maybe, let's compare notes.
Mine's not a chill guy. Mine.
Okay.
I think it's what is it? The SIG-wench command or SIG-wench signal.
Yeah.
And then I barely remember, but I basically have to do get-env and put-env to rewrite the amount of calls that, like, I basically create a new terminal, measure it, or I clear out the get-env or put-env so that it's not cached, get a new terminal, measure it, and then like re-render and then put it back just in case. So it feels a little bit wonky to me.
I did the same thing, except that you can just do, after you clear out those, first of all, those ENVs were really messed with me for a while because I didn't realize that those were being put somewhere, and I didn't realize it was like a cache situation. Yep. I was like, why is this not happening? I know it's happening.
I know.
I spent a lot of time logging and dumping on that one. But if you clear out the ENV and then you just say this init dimensions again, you just get it. It's just fresh. It's just like it's like a 4-liner or something like that.
Yeah. I think that's close to what I do.
I think that sounds about like what you did.
But yeah, and the thing, I remember one time I was showing you interactive commands, which we can talk about in a second, and I resized, and it was the SIG-wench along with the whatever it is, like stream choose or whatever.
Stream
those
select.
things, stream select. Yeah. Those things working together, the SIG-wench killed the stream select, and that was when the error blew up. And so I have to have like a process that's like, hey, if you're in interactive mode and you're resizing, we're going to need to suppress this error or eat the error.
Keep all the balls in the air.
Keep all the balls in the air. Freaking nightmare.
God. Yeah, you cracked the interactive thing, which was something I was trying to do for a while, and you went because you were now in control of all of these processes and all of these output, you could say, I say what goes on this terminal.
Exactly.
You don't get to change things. And so you cracked something that I had been trying to crack for a while in an elegant way. I cracked it in a very inelegant way, and it was very gross.
The jury's out, but yeah.
Yeah, so that was basically a result of you basically creating your own pseudo terminal, your own emulator, and controlling the situation, right? So as soon as you did that, anything goes underneath, right?
Yeah.
And you're just sending. So basically, just as a background, like if you have basically one tab that allows you to run like make model or make controller or like all of the artisan make commands, and you can interact with them in that tab without messing with the outside process and having it all in line and clean. And that may not sound hard, but it's very difficult. And
turns out it's very difficult.
It's very difficult. And so was this controlling and this sort of like emulator thing born out of that, or this was already there and you said, oh, now that I have that, I can do this?
No, the emulator came as a necessity to handle Laravel prompts, which came from the interactive part. So I watched Josh Siri, friend of the show, friend of ours. Josh Siri did a good YouTube video, as he is wont to do, on Solo. And the first thing I think that he tried was like, I want to have my make command constantly running so I can just hop over and make new stuff. And it didn't work. I was like, oh, shoot. It's not interactive. What the hell? And so I watched that and I was like, yeah, shoot, interactive is a good idea. And so that's when I like went down the deep, dark rabbit hole of TTY, PTY, figured out that Symfony has this input thing. So I'm like deep in the bowels of the computer and got it working, right? So I get it working and I'm like, I'm going to hit the I key to go interactive. And then I'm going to start typing. And so I hit the I key and I was like, it's working. And I started typing and my screen just got shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter because Jess was like moving 5 up, clearing, moving 5 up, clearing. And I'm like, oh, this is bad. And so that's when the interactive mode necessitated writing a screen emulator such that I could calculate what is the final representable state and then feed that out to Solo. And so that was the part that led me down the whole, like, I have to write these buffers to keep track of it all so that I could, tab over, hit I, and start typing, and everything just looks exactly as it should. And the kind of like, we're going like 6 levels deep because that command that I run in the make tab, you may know that you can type PHP artisan make : model. test, factory, enum. You can't type PHP artisan make and get a Laravel prompt that says, what do you want to make? Unless you're using Solo, because now you can. Because what I do is...
For the low price of $99.99 a month, you can get a make command.
It's available for free on GitHub, but you can Venmo me $99.99 a month, and I will accept it.
That's right.
What you can do... so what I did was I wrote just a honest-to-goodness Laravel command. And then that's the command that I register with Solo. So that's kind of a nice thing. It's like, I want some advanced functionality. I'll just write it as a traditional Laravel command, and then I'll run that in Solo. But this
pipe it in.
This Solo :make command, what it does. So we're going literally 3 levels deep. So the Solo make command under the hood, when you run Solo make, it runs PHP artisan make. And it gets back a list of, did you mean? And it's like, actually, I don't know what I meant, but I'm going to parse all of that out, take all of those, put those into a Laravel, type ahead search, select, autocomplete or whatever, prompt. And so I can run Solo make, and it says, what do you want to make? And I can type in and model and migration, and all that stuff shows up. And so I type model. Then what happens is I now have to spawn the proper command. So I'm in Solo make. I've run the underlying artisan process, gathered up all of the options, put those into a prompt that is inside of my control. Now the user says, I want to make a model. And I, as Solo, am not my responsibility. But what I can do is I can run PHP artisan make model under the hood, and then I need to gather all of the output from that underlying process and proxy all of the input to that underlying process. And so within my Solo make command, I am now running a sub-process of PHP artisan make model, and I'm whenever I type into Solo make, it receives that input and forwards it to the underlying process, which is make model. And so now I'm typing inside the sub process, and it's doing all of its stuff. And then finally, when that sub process completes, that sub process dies, it exits, and it comes back up to the Solo control and says, all right, what do you want to make next? And so it just runs in an infinite loop such that you can leave it open in the Solo tabs. When you run this inside of Solo, the stupid thing that is happening is you're running PHP artisan Solo. Inside of Solo, you're running PHP artisan Solo make. Inside of Solo make, you're running PHP artisan make model. And you're proxying the input from Solo to Solo make to make model. So
from
you're 3 levels deep. Yes. Yes. And then all that output has to make its way all the way back out to the top and then run through my screen emulator and then be put to the screen. But now you can just leave a make tab open all the time. You can enter, it's great. You can enter interactive mode, do all your stuff, and then exit interactive mode without killing the process. And so the nice thing about that is you can exit interactive mode mid-command and be like, what was the name of that thing? Hop over to PHP Storm, be like, that's right. Okay, we use plural, or we call it this way. Hop back to Solo, hit interactive again, and pick up right where you left off inside that command, which is 2 levels deep, and continue typing. And then all of your enters and your control Cs, all of that is proxied all the way down. So you can leave it and pause and come back later. You can actually kill it and it'll restart. You can let it run in a loop and it just sits there forever. It's great. It's great. And I did all of that accidentally on one PR that was supposed to be just about hotkeys, but I kind of munged it all together, and I've apologized to the people, but it's hundreds of changes.
Is that out yet? Is that something upcoming, or is that out yet?
No. So that is open in PR number 4, and it's just a matter of being brave enough to merge it.
People are gonna flip their lids.
I know.
I feel do you know that gif of John C. Reilly where he's just confused consistently?
I don't know who John C. Reilly is.
John C. Reilly? Step Brothers? Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly?
Yeah. Yeah,
he's got this weird little fro, and he's just confused and it's smash panning in.
Yep.
That's what I felt like as that was happening, as you were laying all that information at me. It was that I if there was a crown to give, it's yours. I don't it ain't me anymore, I'll tell you that much. Wow, dude. I could talk to you all day, but I also know we have things to do and we're coming up on a holiday, so I'm going to unfortunately wrap this up. But if you ever want to come and talk about a frivolous side project again, you're always welcome to.
I don't know if it can get more frivolous than this, but I would love to come back at some point.
I think you could get more frivolous than this. This is actually a side project with tangible output. I mean, this is really genuinely helpful. I think it's
I hope so. Yeah.
Actually, I don't think it's frivolous at all. I think it's over-engineered in a wonderful way, but I think the end product is genuinely useful. I mean, I think I told you this, but like when Taylor popped that into Slack the first time, the composer run dev thing, I was like, this is awesome. I hate this output.
You got
I am
hives.
not a fan.
You're like,
and I was
can
like,
do it better.
I was like, is this why I was hired? Maybe. And then, and I was like, I don't have the time. I have so many things to do. And then you come along and you're like, I got you. No problem. Solved.
Yeah,
Problem
some people
solved.
have asked, like, why isn't this merged into core? And I was like, guys, do you know how stupid this is? Like, do you understand all of this garbage that I'm having to do? I don't want to foist that upon the shoulders of a different set of maintainers. So if you ever get the inkling, you can lobby, but I don't want to give this to y'all.
As a concept and as a construct, what you've created is very fascinating. And I think I've seen some of the code. It looks very clean, and I think it's like pretty maintainable. And you've abstracted it away enough where I feel like you could apply this to other things in other ways. So it is fascinating. I've thought about it. This is a zero promises. I'm not even authorized to do this. But I think what you've done here is like beyond fascinating and like incredibly smart. And congrats on being so smart.
Thanks.
All right. So Solo is the project that's up
Solo
on
is the project.
GitHub. And then where can people find you, or where should people find you? Where would you like people to find you?
Well, I'm still in the good or bad place, depending on your point of view. So you can find me on twitter.com. X is a stupid name. Twitter.com, Aaron D. Francis. I will dip my toes into the bluer skies after Thanksgiving, perhaps. Or you can just go to aaronfrancis.com. Everything should be there.
That's where I've been pointing people to just the site. I'm like, I don't know exactly where you're going to find me right now. Just go to the site and you'll figure it out from there. It's pretty obvious.
That's right. Own your stuff, people. Regardless of where you hang out, you got to own your stuff.
All right. So AaronFrancis.com.
AaronFrancis.com. No D. Yeah.
No D. Correct.
No D.
That's where people should go as a statement of record.
Yes.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much, Aaron. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And enjoy the rest of the day.
All right. You too. See ya.